The wind howled through the towering pines, a deep and mournful sound that seemed to carry a warning. The Canadian wilderness stretched for miles in every direction, endless and untamed, where the trees whispered secrets and the shadows played tricks on weary travelers. Ethan adjusted his backpack, shifting the weight of his gear as he trudged up the narrow trail. He had spent years hiking through these forests, exploring places few dared to go, but something about this trip felt different. He couldn't shake the uneasy feeling creeping up his spine. The locals in the last town had been strangely adamant, warning him not to venture too deep into the woods. Their faces had been pale, their voices low. People go missing out there, an old man had told him outside a gas station. His milky eyes filled with something Ethan couldn't quite place. Fear. Regret. If you see it, don't stop. Just run. Ethan had laughed it off at the time. He had heard plenty of campfire stories. Tales of strange creatures lurking in the wilderness, things that shouldn't exist. But he wasn't the kind of person who scared easily. He had always believed that there was a logical explanation for everything. But as he stood there now, surrounded by the dense, suffocating quiet of the deep forest, he wasn't so sure. The trees loomed over him, their branches gnarled and twisted like outstretched fingers. The usual sounds of nature, the rustling leaves, the distant calls of birds, were absent. It was as if the entire forest was holding its breath. Then he heard it. Heavy thump. Distant but unmistakable. Ethan froze, his breath catching in his throat. It wasn't an animal. The sound was too deep, too deliberate. Came again, closer this time. A slow, measured step, as if something massive was moving through the trees. His pulse quickened. He scanned the tree line, his eyes darting between the thick trunks, searching for any sign of movement. And then he saw it. Shadow. Not just any shadow. This one stretched unnaturally high against the trees, towering above even the tallest pines. At first, it almost looked like a trick of the light, but then it shifted. Move. The outline of something impossibly large. Ethan's stomach twisted into a knot. His instincts screamed at him to turn and run, but his legs wouldn't move. He could barely breathe. Then a low, guttural sound rumbled through the forest, something between a growl and a breath, so deep it vibrated in his chest. The trees trembled. A wave of cold washed over him, sinking into his bones. And then, just as suddenly as it had appeared, the shadow stepped forward. The last thing Ethan saw before he finally found the strength to run was the impossible size of it, the sheer scale of whatever had been watching him. A giant figure standing between the trees, its head nearly scraping the highest branches. And it was looking right at him. Ethan's breath came in short, ragged bursts as he forced himself to move. His boots slid against the damp earth, kicking up leaves and twigs as he bolted down the trail. The heavy weight of his backpack slowed him, but he didn't dare stop to take it off. Every instinct in his body screamed the same thing. Run. Behind him, the forest groaned under the weight of something massive. The sound wasn't like normal footsteps. It was deeper, heavier, as if the ground itself was being pressed down with each step. Trees creaked, their trunks bending ever so slightly before snapping back into place. Whatever was following him wasn't just walking, it was closing in. Ethan's mind raced. He had hiked through remote areas before, places where bears and wolves roamed freely, but this was different. He had never seen anything move the way that shadow had. It wasn't just tall, it was unnatural. The way the darkness wrapped around it, the way the trees seemed to shudder in its presence. It wasn't just some oversized animal. He risked a glance over his shoulder. Mistake. The figure was still there, barely visible between the trees, its form shifting between shadows and reality. It moved in a way that didn't make sense, almost like it was flickering in and out of existence. One moment it was further back, the next closer. Ethan stumbled, nearly falling forward as his boot caught on an exposed root. His hand shot out, bracing against the damp earth. The impact sent a sharp jolt up his arms, but he barely registered the pain. He scrambled back to his feet, heart hammering against his ribs. He had to think. He couldn't just keep running blindly. He needed to find somewhere, a place to hide, a way to lose whatever was following him. But the forest around him felt different now, as if the trees had shifted, their trunks pressing closer together, cutting off his escape routes. Then he saw it. A narrow break in the tree line just ahead, a sharp drop leading down to a rocky stream below. The water was dark, churning over jagged stones, but it was moving fast. If he could reach it, maybe, just maybe, he could throw off his pursuer. Gritting his teeth, he pushed forward. The sound of breaking branches followed him, each one louder than the last. Whatever was behind him was gaining. Ethan's legs burned as he sprinted the last few feet, his boots skidding on the damp earth before he launched himself over the edge. The air rushed past him in a blur of cold and weightlessness before he hit the water. The shock of it stole the breath from his lungs. The current grabbed hold of him immediately, pulling him under. He tumbled, his limbs colliding with rocks beneath the surface. For a terrifying moment, he couldn't tell which way was up. Then, just as panic threatened to take over, his fingers found the edge of a jagged rock. He grabbed hold, forcing himself up, gasping as he broke through the surface. Water rushed past his face, but he managed to pull himself toward the riverbank, dragging his shaking body onto the slick stones. He lay there for a moment, coughing, his chest heaving as he struggled to catch his breath. His backpack was soaked, but he was alive. The forest above him was eerily silent. No sound of heavy footsteps, no creaking trees. Did he lose it? Ethan's pulse pounded in his ears as he slowly lifted his head, scanning the tree line. Nothing. No shadow. No impossible figure standing among the pines. He swallowed hard, his body still tense, every nerve on edge. Maybe, just maybe, whatever had been following him couldn't cross the water. Maybe it wasn't something that obeyed the normal laws of nature. But even as the thought crossed his mind, he couldn't shake the feeling that it was still watching. Somewhere, hidden in the depths of the forest, it was waiting, and Ethan had no idea why. He wiped the water from his face, trying to calm his racing thoughts. He needed a plan. He was miles from the nearest town, deep in a part of the forest where cell signals were non-existent. His map was in his backpack, probably ruined by the water, and he wasn't even sure if he was still on the right path anymore. But one thing was certain. He couldn't stay here. With a shaky breath, Ethan pushed himself upright, his muscles aching from the impact of the fall. He turned his gaze back toward the trees, watching, waiting for any sign of movement. The shadows remained still, but he knew better than to trust the silence. He adjusted his backpack and started moving again, following the river downstream. He didn't know where it would lead, but at least it was a direction. He just had to keep going, because if that thing was still out there, he wasn't going to wait around to find out what it wanted. Ethan kept his pace steady, his soaked clothes clinging to his skin as he followed the river downstream. The water rushed beside him, its endless movement the only sound breaking the heavy silence of the forest. Every so often, he glanced over his shoulder, scanning the dense trees, searching for anything, any sign that the figure was still out there. But the forest remained still, and that was what scared him the most. He didn't trust the silence. It felt unnatural, like something was deliberately holding the world in place, keeping the usual sounds of the wilderness at bay. There were no birds, no rustling branches, no distant snap of twigs from animals moving through the undergrowth. Just the river. The air felt thick, charged with something he couldn't explain. He kept walking, keeping close to the water, forcing himself forward. He wasn't sure how long he had been moving, minutes, hours. The sky above had started to darken, and the cold was beginning to settle into his bones. He needed shelter, a fire, something to keep his mind from slipping into panic. That was when he saw it. Through the trees, just barely visible in the fading light, a cabin. His breath caught. It was old, really old, with weathered wood and a slanted roof that sagged slightly on one side. There was no smoke from the chimney, no lights in the small windows. It looked abandoned. Ethan hesitated. He knew better than to just barge into a place like this. Something about it felt wrong, like it had been sitting untouched for far too long. But the temperature was dropping fast, and he was soaked. If he didn't dry off, hypothermia was a real threat. His fingers tightened around the straps of his backpack as he stepped closer. The door was slightly ajar, creaking as the wind pushed against it. He swallowed hard, then raised a shaky hand and nudged it open further. The inside was just as lifeless as he had expected. Dust coated the wooden floor, undisturbed. A small table sat in the corner, a few rusted tools scattered on top. A fireplace, empty and cold, stood against the far wall. There were no personal belongings, no clothes, no food, nothing to suggest someone had been here recently. Ethan exhaled, relief mixing uneasily with caution. If it had been abandoned for a long time, that meant he wasn't trespassing on someone's land. He could rest, dry off, and plan his next move. But as he stepped inside, something stopped him. Smell. Faint but distinct, like damp earth and decaying leaves. It reminded him of the deep forest, the places untouched by people, where things lurked in the shadows. He turned, peering into the dim corners of the cabin. The air felt heavier inside, as if something unseen was pressing against his skin. He moved carefully, his boots making soft thuds against the wooden floor. There was another door on the far side of the room, slightly open. Beyond it, darkness. A slow, sinking feeling spread through his stomach. He shouldn't be here. But before he could back away, a sound cut through the silence. Faint thump somewhere outside. Ethan's breath hitched. He turned toward the open doorway, his heart pounding. The trees stood motionless beyond the clearing. The wind had died down. Nothing moved. And then another thump. Closer. His pulse roared in his ears. He backed away from the door, stepping deeper into the cabin, his mind screaming at him to stay quiet. He pressed himself against the wall, trying to control his breathing. The sound came again, slow, deliberate steps, something heavy moving through the forest. And then, for the first time, he heard something else. Voice. Low, almost a whisper, but not quite human. It came from the darkness beyond the trees, drifting through the cold night air like a warning. I see you. Ethan's blood ran cold. The words barely sounded like speech, more like a breath, something that had been waiting too long in the dark and was finally stirring awake. His grip tightened on the strap of his backpack, his legs tensing. He had to move. He couldn't just stand here, waiting for whatever was out there to get closer. Then another voice. This one softer, coming from inside the cabin. Don't let it in. Ethan's stomach twisted. He spun toward the sound, eyes darting across the empty room. No one was there. The words had come from the darkness beyond the second door. A sharp crack outside sent his heart racing. He turned back toward the open doorway, just in time to see something move between the trees. The shadow was back. But this time it wasn't standing still. It was getting closer. Ethan's body locked up, every muscle frozen in place as the shadow shifted between the trees. It was closer than before. Too close. The dark mass seemed to pulse, shifting and stretching in ways that didn't make sense. He wanted to convince himself it was just a trick of the light, that his tired, waterlogged brain was distorting reality. But deep down he knew better. The air in the cabin felt heavy, pressing against his skin. His breath came in shallow gasps as he forced himself to move, stepping backward deeper into the room. The wooden floor creaked under his weight, the sound unnaturally loud in the silence. Outside, the forest was dead quiet. No wind, no rustling leaves, just the steady, deliberate thump of approaching footsteps. Then the voice came again. Whoa, whoa. It didn't carry through the air naturally. It crawled into his ears, as if the words were spoken directly into his skull. "Come out." Ethan clenched his jaw, his fingers curling into fists. Every instinct told him that he couldn't let it see him again. That if he stepped into the open, if it laid eyes on him, it would be too late. His gaze darted to the second door, the one leading deeper into the cabin. His pulse hammered as he made a choice. He turned and ran. The floor groaned under his weight as he shoved through the doorway, plunging into the darkness beyond. His shoulder hit a wall, sending a cloud of dust into the stale air. He barely had time to register the narrow space, a hallway leading to another room, before the cabin shuddered. The walls trembled, the wooden beams creaking as if something enormous had just pressed against them. A deep vibration rolled through the air, making Ethan's teeth clench. Outside, the footsteps stopped. Ethan held his breath. The silence stretching too long, making his heartbeat sound impossibly loud in his ears. He inched backward, pressing himself against the wall, forcing himself not to move. Then a slow, dragging sound. Something was pressing against the cabin walls, sliding across them, testing them. The wood groaned in protest. Ethan's mind raced. It knew he was inside. It wasn't leaving. A sharp, splintering crack echoed through the cabin as one of the wooden planks near the entrance split apart. A cold gust of air rushed through the space, carrying with it that same awful smell, damp earth and decay. Ethan swallowed hard. He needed to move now. Keeping his steps as quiet as possible, he eased further down the narrow hallway, his hands brushing against the rough wood. His fingers grazed something, metal. Handle. He gripped it and turned. The door creaked as it opened, revealing another room. A single, dust-covered chair sat in the center. Faded curtains hung limply over a small, cracked window. The walls were covered in deep scratches, long, uneven marks carved into the wood. His stomach twisted. Someone had been here before. And they hadn't left willingly. A gust of wind rattled the walls, making the room feel smaller, suffocating. And sound. Not from outside. From behind him. Ethan's breath caught in his throat. He turned, his body tensing, every nerve on edge. The hallway behind him was dark, the doorway barely visible in the dim light. But something was there. Shape. Unmoving. It took his brain a second to process what he was looking at. Person. Or what was left of one. The figure was slumped against the wall, its arms limp at its sides, its head tilted at an unnatural angle. The clothes were tattered, barely holding together. But it wasn't the body that made Ethan's skin crawl. It was the face. Or rather, the lack of one. The skin where the eyes, nose, and mouth should have been was smooth, as if it had been wiped clean. No features. Just an empty, blank surface. Ethan's stomach lurched. His breath came in short, ragged bursts as his mind screamed at him to move. And a whisper. Not from the figure. From everywhere. You shouldn't have come here. The walls groaned. The air turned ice cold. The shadows at the edges of the room shifted. And just beyond the window, in the darkness of the forest, something was watching. Ethan's pulse pounded in his ears. His body frozen in place as the whisper faded into the silence. His eyes darted back to the faceless figure slumped against the wall, the reality of it twisting his stomach into knots. He needed to get out now. But just as he took a step back, something changed. The room felt off, like the air itself had thickened. The shadows near the corners of the cabin shifted again, but this time they didn't just move. They stretched. Ethan's breath hitched. He wasn't imagining it. The darkness along the edges of the room was pulling away from the walls, bleeding toward him like ink spreading through water. The sensation of being watched grew unbearable, prickling against his skin. And then the body moved. Not much. Just the smallest twitch of the fingers. Ethan stumbled back, slamming into the wooden table in the center of the room. The sudden noise sent a jolt through his system, but the figure didn't react. It just sat there, motionless, its blank face turned slightly toward him. And then a sound from outside. A deep, guttural scrape, like something massive dragging against the earth. Close. Too close. Ethan's chest tightened. Whatever was out there, it was right outside the cabin now. His eyes flicked toward the window. The curtain swayed slightly in the cold draft, but beyond the glass, all he could see was darkness. Not just the night, but something deeper, something that seemed to absorb the faint light inside the cabin. A shadow loomed beyond the glass. It was here. The wooden beams of the cabin groaned under invisible pressure. The walls shuddered. The temperature dropped so suddenly that Ethan could see his breath in the dim light. And then the whisper came again. But this time it wasn't just a whisper. It was inside the room with him. You see now. The voice crawled through the air, slipping past his defenses, burrowing deep into his mind. It wasn't coming from one place. It was everywhere. The walls. The floor. The thing slumped against the wall. Even inside him. Ethan's stomach twisted as something deep inside screamed at him to run. Then a knock. A slow, deliberate tap against the window pane. Ethan's blood ran cold. His body refused to turn, refused to acknowledge what he already knew. The thing outside. It was knocking. His breathing turned shallow. His fingers trembling as he braced himself. Don't look. Don't look. Don't look. But something else in the room moved. The faceless figure's head twitched. A slow, jerking motion as its blank face lifted toward the window. Ethan swallowed hard, his muscles locking in place. And then a second knock, this time louder, more insistent. The room seemed to breathe, the wooden walls expanding and contracting like a living thing. The shadow outside the window pulsed, shifting as if something was peering inside. And then the cabin door creaked. Not fully, just an inch. Just enough. Ethan's breath came fast and shallow. His body screamed for him to move, to bolt out the back door, to jump through the window, anything to get away. But then, something he hadn't expected happened. The faceless figure, it turned toward him. Not just its head, its entire body. Low. Unnatural. And for the first time Ethan realized something. It wasn't dead. It had never been dead. And now, it was standing up. Ethan's breath caught in his throat as the faceless figure rose to its feet. The movement was wrong, jerky, unnatural, like a puppet being yanked by invisible strings. Its blank face remained fixed in his direction, as if it could see him despite having no eyes. The air in the cabin had turned unbearably cold, thick with something unspoken, something ancient. Outside, the knocking stopped. The silence that followed was worse. Ethan's body screamed for him to move, but fear had locked his muscles in place. The figure took a slow, dragging step toward him. The wood beneath its feet creaked, the sound cutting through the air like a warning. And then the cabin door burst open. A violent gust of wind slammed through the room, scattering dust and shaking the fragile walls. Ethan barely had time to react before a shadow filled the doorway. It was here. The massive figure loomed, its body too tall, too wide for the entrance. It didn't step inside, it didn't have to. The darkness around it seemed to spill forward, reaching into the cabin like a living thing. Ethan's chest tightened. This was it. There was nowhere left to run. The faceless figure stopped moving. Its head tilted toward the doorway like it was waiting. And then the whisper came again. But this time it wasn't coming from the shadow outside. It was coming from inside Ethan's own head. Choose. His breath hitched. The faceless figure took another step forward. The shadow in the doorway seemed to pulse, the air around it warping like heat rising from pavement. And Ethan understood. He wasn't just a victim of whatever was happening here. He was part of it. The voice inside him wasn't a warning. It was a command. Voice. One of them had to stay. The faceless figure or him. The realization hit like ice in his veins. That's why the others never made it out. That's why the cabin felt like a graveyard, because it was. Whoever entered had to replace what was already inside. That's how it worked. His stomach twisted. His mind screamed for a way out, for a loophole, but the presence in his head was pushing now, pressing against his thoughts like a tide he couldn't fight. Choose. Ethan's fingers curled into fists. The faceless figure took another step. The shadow outside the door waited. His body moved before his mind could catch up. He lunged forward toward the figure, toward whatever nightmare had trapped it here before him. Cabin shook. The walls groaned. And then, darkness, the sound of wind, the smell of damp earth. When Ethan opened his eyes, he wasn't standing anymore. He was sitting, slumped against the wall. His arms limp at his sides. His body heavy, too heavy. His vision blurred, but he didn't need to see to know. He couldn't move. He didn't need to. Because he wasn't Ethan anymore. Outside the cabin, footsteps crunched in the leaves. A new voice. Unsuspecting, curious. Hello. And deep inside the cabin, Ethan felt his mouth open. But no words came out. Because he didn't have a mouth anymore. The cabin was silent again. The shadows had settled, retreating into their familiar places. The wind outside whispered through the trees, rustling the leaves as if nothing had happened. But inside something had changed. Ethan was still there. Or at least what was left of him. He could feel everything, the rough wood against his back, the cold stillness of the air. But he couldn't move. His limbs were no longer his to command. His breathing was gone. His heart didn't pound in his chest. Instead there was just emptiness. A hollow space where he used to be. He wanted to scream, to run, to do anything, but he couldn't. He was trapped. A spectator inside his own body, forced to sit, to wait. Then came the sound of footsteps. They crunched through the underbrush, slow and cautious. Ethan couldn't turn his head, but he could feel it. Someone was getting closer. The shadow at the doorway shifted, and a figure appeared, outlined against the moonlight. A young man, maybe in his early 20s. He had a flashlight in one hand, a backpack slung over his shoulder. His face was wary but not afraid. Not yet. Hello, he called, stepping cautiously inside. His voice echoed through the cabin, bouncing off the walls. Ethan wanted to warn him, wanted to tell him to run. But no sound came from his mouth. Because he didn't have a mouth anymore. The man hesitated, shining his flashlight across the room. His beam passed over the dust-covered furniture, the scratched walls, the doorway leading into the back rooms. Then it landed on Ethan. For a long moment the man just stared. Ethan could only sit there, unmoving. He could feel the man's gaze lingering on his face. His featureless, empty face. A flicker of something crossed the man's eyes. Recognition. Like a half-forgotten dream. Something scratching at the edges of his mind. Some part of him knew. Knew this place wasn't right. Knew he should leave. Ethan willed him to turn around, to walk back into the forest, to disappear and never come back. But he didn't. The man took another step closer. And then the whisper returned. Not in the room. Not in the air. Inside him. Juice. Ethan's hollow chest clenched. No, not again. But it wasn't up to him anymore. The walls of the cabin seemed to breathe, shifting ever so slightly. The air grew heavier. The flashlight flickered in the man's grip. He frowned. Stepped back. His instincts finally kicking in. But it was too late. The shadow outside the doorway moved. A deep, guttural scrape filled the air, like something massive dragging itself forward. The light in the cabin dimmed. The air curled around them, thick with something Ethan could feel but not see. The man's breath hitched. His body stiffened. And Ethan knew the choice had been made. The man's fingers twitched. His legs locked in place. His body refused to move, to run. Just like Ethan's had. The whisper came again, a final command. Trade. The flashlight slipped from the man's grasp, clattering against the wooden floor. His eyes widened. His lips parting in a silent scream. And then Ethan could move. The weight that had held him down, that had trapped him for what felt like an eternity, was gone. He gasped, stumbling forward, his lungs filling with air that burned. His hands trembled as he looked down at them. His hands. His arms. His body. He was free. Behind him, the man collapsed against the wall. His breathing slowed. His shoulders slumped. Ethan didn't have to look to know what had happened. The man was taking his place. The walls creaked. The air in the cabin shifted, like the house itself had exhaled. The rules had been followed. The trade was complete. Ethan's stomach twisted. A wave of nausea crashed over him, the weight of what just happened settling into his bones. He had escaped. But at what cost? His hands shook as he stumbled toward the door, his legs barely holding him upright. His mind screamed at him to run, to get as far away as possible. But before he could, he felt it. Presence. Butching. He turned his head just slightly. The man was still sitting there. His body slumped against the wall. But something was wrong. His chest didn't rise or fall. His hands were limp at his sides. His head tilted forward ever so slightly. And his face was smooth. Me. Ethan turned away, his heart hammering against his ribs. He didn't wait. He didn't look back. He ran. Out of the cabin, into the night, into the endless stretch of trees. His breath came in short, ragged bursts, his feet slamming against the forest floor. And as he ran, he heard it, faint just behind him. Knock. Soft at first, then louder, and then silence. The cabin had a new occupant, and the forest was waiting for the next.